The last human soldier woke up and found a shackled alien waiting for him. The first thing he felt was pain. Not sharp, but heavy, like his body had been filled with molten lead. The second thing was the cold. Sergeant Daniel Cross forced his eyes open. For a moment, there was nothing but a blur of shadows and metallic glint. The smell hit him next. Rust, oil, and something else, the acrid bite of alien antiseptic. When his vision cleared, he realized he was lying on the floor of his cell. Thick bars of dark alloy formed a cage around him. Beyond them, a corridor stretched into dimness, lit by strips of sickly blue light. The faint hum of generators vibrated through the walls. Somewhere far away, he could hear a rhythmic clang, like heavy machinery working in the dark. But none of that held his attention for long. In the far corner of the cell sat a figure, shackled, knees drawn to her chest, head bowed so that the long, white hair tumbled forward, veiling her face. Her skin, he blinked twice to be sure, was a rich, deep orange. Not painted, not lit by strange lamps, but truly, vividly orange. The color of autumn leaves under a pale sun. Daniel pushed himself up, biting back a groan. His armor was gone. He wore only tattered fatigues. The left sleeve was torn open where a jagged scar crossed his forearm. Every movement sent pain shooting through his ribs. The woman, if she was a woman, shifted slightly, and the clink of her chains echoed in the quiet. Her hair caught the blue light and turned it silver white. She raised her head. Eyes. Not human eyes. Large, feline in shape, the irises glowing faintly gold. They fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath falter. He swallowed. "You understand me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke. Her voice was low, accented in a way he couldn't place, musical but edged. "Yes, I understand your tongue." Something in him wanted to ask 1,000 questions at once, but training held him back. First, assess, then act. He looked around the cell again, noting details. The walls were welded steel, but not Terran design. The bars were thick enough to stop a power drill. No visible lock, which meant magnetic seal. The floor sloped slightly toward a drain in the center. "Where are we?" he asked. Her gaze didn't waver. "A place where neither of us is meant to leave." He exhaled sharply. "Whose prison?" She tilted her head slightly, the chain at her neck shifting. "Yours. And mine." Her answer made no sense, but before he could push, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Two figures appeared, massive, armored, with insectoid faces and long, jointed limbs. Kvar wardens. He'd seen them before, in the worst parts of the war. They stopped at the bars. One hissed something in their chittering language. The other scanned a panel, and a section of the bars dissolved into thin air with a hiss. Daniel's muscles tightened instinctively. He had no weapon, no plan, just instinct. The taller warden stepped forward and jabbed a long stun rod toward the woman. She didn't flinch, didn't move at all. The rod's tip hovered inches from her cheek. "Up." The alien barked in halting English. She rose slowly, chains dragging on the floor. Even in shackles, she carried herself with a strange dignity, as though the chains were an inconvenience, not a sentence. The warden gestured toward the open space. She stepped forward and staggered. Without thinking, Daniel moved. "Hey." He caught her arm before she fell, his hand closing on warm, surprisingly soft skin. The warden growled, raising the stun rod toward him. Daniel met the alien's gaze, jaw set. "She can't walk like this," he said evenly. "Unless you want to carry her." The alien's mandibles clicked in irritation. For a moment, Daniel thought the strike was coming, but instead, the warden shoved him back. "Move." He obeyed, keeping himself between the wardens and the woman as much as possible. Every step outside the cell felt like a gamble. The corridor stretched endlessly, passing cells both empty and occupied. Daniel caught glimpses of other prisoners, humans, yes, but also other species, most he didn't recognize. All of them watched in silence as the wardens escorted him and the woman deeper into the prison. Finally, they reached a chamber, not large, but packed with equipment, tables, monitors, restraints bolted to the floor. An interrogation room. The wardens positioned the woman in the center. One attached her chains to a floor anchor, The other activated a device that emitted a faint hum. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. The taller warden pointed at him. Sit. He stayed standing. What do you want? The alien tapped its chest plate. Questions. Then work. Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew what work meant in Kvar hands. Forced labor until you broke, body or mind. But what puzzled him more was the woman. She said nothing, made no sound. Her golden eyes flicked to him only once. And in that glance, he saw something. Not fear, not resignation. Something sharper, calculating. Whatever she wasn't broken. The wardens began their questioning, mostly about troop movements, supply lines, command structures. Daniel gave them nothing but static answers, deflecting, refusing. They alternated between threats and blows, but he'd been through worse. When they finally turned to her, the questions changed. They weren't about war. They were about him. Where he'd come from. Why he'd been found near her sector. She answered every question with the same phrase. I do not know. The wardens didn't believe her. They used the stun rod. She stayed on her knees, trembling, but never screamed. When the aliens finally left, sealing the door, Daniel moved to her side. You okay? Her breathing was shallow, but steady. You shouldn't have helped me, she said quietly. Why not? She looked at him again, eyes catching the dim light. Because now, they think we're connected. And in this place, she glanced toward the door. Connections are dangerous. Daniel sat back, his own injuries throbbing. Too late now. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. Yes, too late. Somewhere in the hum of the prison, a siren wailed, low, rising, urgent. The lights flickered once. Her gaze sharpened. Something is coming. And Daniel realized, with a strange rush of certainty, that whatever it was, it would not be the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The siren's wail faded into a low, pulsing hum that seemed to seep into the walls. Daniel rose from the floor, every muscle in his body coiled. The prison lights dimmed further, plunging the interrogation chamber into a half-shadow that made the metallic walls gleam like oil. The woman, still chained to the floor anchor, tilted her head slightly, her white hair falling across one golden eye. They're locking the sectors, she murmured. Locking them? Daniel asked. Why? Her gaze slid toward the door. Because something's broken containment. The words had weight. Not panic, but certainty. Before Daniel could press further, a muffled boom echoed from somewhere deep in the facility. Dust shook loose from the ceiling, drifting down in lazy spirals. Then another blast, closer this time. The hum of the siren quickened. The heavy door hissed open. Two Kvar wardens stumbled in, weapons drawn, their insectoid mandibles twitching. One barked something in their chittering language, the other moving toward the woman to unhook her chains. Move! The taller one snapped in English. Daniel stepped forward. Where are you taking her? The warden swung his weapon toward Daniel's chest. Not your concern. Move. Daniel weighed his options. He had no weapon, no leverage, but every instinct screamed that letting them take her was the wrong move. Still, he stepped aside. For now. They freed her wrists from the anchor, but not from the manacles. The moment she stood, her posture shifted, subtle, but Daniel caught it. Less like a prisoner, more like a predator biding time. They shoved her toward the corridor. Daniel followed, his steps matching hers. Why am I still here? He asked one of the wardens. The alien didn't look back. Orders. You both come. That was new. Daniel glanced at the woman. She didn't meet his eyes, but he saw the tension in her jaw. The deeper they went into the prison, the worse it looked. Smoke hung in the air. Lights flickered erratically. Some doors had been blown open, their magnetic seals melted and twisted. Once, they passed a cell where something large and furred lay sprawled in the doorway, unmoving. Daniel didn't look long enough to decide if it was dead. In the distance, screams echoed. Not just human. They reached a wide intersection where 4 corridors met under a vaulted ceiling. A group of armed Kvar soldiers clustered there, their weapons tracking the shadows. One of them pointed to Daniel and the woman. Inside. Now. Inside meant another room. This one larger, with walls lined in strange machinery that pulsed faintly with light. Daniel recognized none of it, but the woman's eyes lingered on the devices like she understood exactly what they could do. The door sealed behind them with a sharp hiss. One of the wardens turned to her. You know this system. You will stabilize it. She stared back, unblinking. And if I don't? The warden's mandibles spread in something like a smile. Then the human dies first. Daniel took a step forward, heat flaring in his chest. Hey. Her voice cut him off. Calm. Measured. I'll do it. They unshackled her wrists and shoved her toward the console. Daniel stood close enough to see her fingers brush the controls, long, slender fingers that moved with deliberate slowness. The machinery responded, lights shifting from amber to green, hums deepening. He leaned closer. You really fixing it? Her lips curved just barely. That depends. On what? On whether you want to leave this place alive. Daniel didn't answer, but the question lodged itself in his mind. She was playing a game here, one the Kvar didn't realize they were in. Another explosion rocked the walls. A high, inhuman screech cut through the noise, followed by the heavy clang of something massive moving fast. The wardens froze for a heartbeat, then barked orders in their own tongue. The woman glanced at Daniel. When the next blast comes, stay close to me. Before he could ask why, it came, a deafening roar that shook the floor, followed by the sharp crack of metal tearing. The lights blew out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. In the chaos, her hand closed around his wrist, stronger than he expected. Move. He didn't hesitate. They slipped away from the consoles, hugging the wall. Somewhere in the black, a warden shouted, then was cut short by a wet, choking sound. A pale emergency light flickered on for half a second. In that flash, Daniel saw something that didn't belong to any species he knew, all claws and shadow, moving too fast to track. The woman pulled him into a side corridor, her bare feet silent on the cold metal. Daniel's boots were less forgiving, each step a dull thud. He tried to keep up, his mind racing. What the hell is happening? A breach, she said, not slowing. And a distraction. You planned this. Her voice was a whisper, but edged with something like pride. I waited for it. They rounded a corner into another cell block, this one abandoned, the doors hanging open. She guided him into one of the cells and pressed her back against the wall, listening. Footsteps. Not far. Lighter. Faster. Daniel strained to hear. A small figure appeared in the corridor. Humanoid. Wrapped in ragged cloth. It paused, peering into the darkness, then vanished down another hall. The woman didn't move until the sound faded. Then she turned to Daniel. We don't have much time. He studied her in the dim light. You're not just a prisoner, are you? Her golden eyes met his, unwavering. No, and neither are you. Not anymore. Before he could respond, a loud clang rang out, the unmistakable sound of heavy doors sealing. The emergency lights shifted from red to a pulsing white. That, she said quietly, means the Kvar are losing. Daniel exhaled. Good for us. Her expression was unreadable. Not necessarily. She stepped toward the cell door, peering out. We'll need weapons. And we'll need to move before the next lockdown cycle. Daniel ran a hand through his sweat-matted hair. You got a plan for that? Her lips quirked, just enough to be dangerous. I always have a plan. And for the first time since waking in this nightmare, Daniel felt something unexpected stir beneath the pain and exhaustion. Not hope exactly, but the faint, dangerous thrill of possibility. Daniel didn't know whether to call her confident or reckless. Maybe both. She moved like someone who had been in cages before, and had learned exactly how to slip out of them. They stepped out of the empty cell into the abandoned block. Every sound carried, the low hum of the ventilation, the faint buzz of emergency lights, the distant roars of whatever else was prowling the prison now. Somewhere far away, a gun discharged, echoing metallically down the corridors. She kept her voice low. The guards will regroup at the central armory. If we can reach it before they do, we stand a chance. Daniel's brow furrowed. You know the layout? Her eyes flicked to him, amused despite the situation. You think they only imprison people here? They work us. They make us fix things. They forget that means we learn their walls better than they do. They reached a corner where the corridor split, left toward heavier security doors, right into a narrow service tunnel lined with exposed pipes and wiring. Here, she said, taking the right. Daniel followed, ducking under a dangling cable that still spat occasional sparks. The air was warmer here, almost humid. The tunnel twisted, revealing hatches and maintenance alcoves barely big enough for a person. From behind one hatch came the sound of muffled breathing. Daniel froze, glancing at her. She placed a finger to her lips and moved on without a word. They emerged into a low, wide chamber filled with industrial machines, generators, filtration units, and huge coolant tanks. The air vibrated faintly with the thrum of the machinery. "We cross here," she said, pointing to a narrow catwalk above the generators. "The armory's 2 levels down from this point." They climbed the stairs, the metal groaning under Daniel's weight. From the catwalk, he could see shadows moving between the machines below. Not far, not human. Too fast, too many limbs. "What are those?" he whispered. "Escaped experiments," she replied without looking down. "Not friends." He decided not to ask more. Halfway across, a screech ripped through the chamber. One of the creatures below had spotted them. Its claws scraped against the generator casing as it climbed, and it climbed fast. "Go," she shouted, already breaking into a run. Daniel followed, boots pounding on the metal grating. The thing below let out a bone-deep growl that reverberated through the catwalk supports. A second later, it launched itself upward, one clawed hand catching the railing. Daniel grabbed a loose pipe from the floor, probably part of the catwalk's frame, and swung hard. The metal connected with the creature's arm, making it lose its grip and tumble back into the shadows below. They reached the far side, ducking into another service tunnel just as more claws scraped against the catwalk. Only when the noise faded did they stop to catch their breath. She glanced at him, eyes bright. "You fight well for someone unarmed." "Thanks," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "You run well for someone in chains." Her faint smile was the only answer. They continued through the tunnels until they reached a grated floor overlooking a vertical shaft. Dim light spilled up from below, along with the sound of armored boots. She crouched, peering through the grate. 2 guards. Standard rifles. They'll open the lower hatch to check for breaches. Daniel looked around. The shaft walls were lined with maintenance ladders and cables. "We dropped down behind them." She shook her head. Too loud. Too risky. Instead, she pointed to a loose section of the grate. Together, they worked it free, setting it aside as quietly as possible. Then she lowered herself through, gripping a thick cable and sliding silently toward the bottom. Daniel followed, his palms burning from the friction. They landed behind a stack of storage crates. The 2 Kvar guards were exactly where she'd said, backs to them, attention on the lower hatch controls. She moved first. No hesitation, no wasted motion. One sharp kick to the back of a guard's knee, another twist to grab his weapon before he hit the ground. Daniel took the cue, lunging for the second guard, wrestling the rifle from its hands before shoving it into the wall. In seconds, both were down. Daniel handed her one of the rifles. "Guess you're armed now." She tested the weight of it, then slung it over her shoulder. For now, the armory was 2 corridors over, but they didn't make it there unchallenged. A squad of 3 wardens turned the corner ahead, their mandibles clicking in alarm. Daniel fired first, forcing them to dive for cover. The woman flanked, her movements fluid and precise, each shot finding its mark. Within moments, the corridor was silent again. He stared at her. "You've done this before." She didn't deny it. "I told you. I've been in cages." They reached the armory door, heavy, sealed, with a control panel in the alien script. She knelt by the panel, fingers flying across the controls. The door hissed open. Inside, racks of weapons lined the walls. Rifles, pistols, blades of strange alloys. Daniel grabbed a rifle that felt close enough to human design to be intuitive, along with spare power cells. She took a compact sidearm and a curved blade that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Before they could take more, the alarms shifted, a deep, resonant tone that rattled the floor. Her head snapped toward the door. "They know we're here." Daniel checked the rifle. "Then we don't stay." They slipped back into the corridor, weapons ready. But the prison had changed. Smoke thickened the air. Distant explosions were growing closer. And in the echoes between the sirens, Daniel could swear he heard voices, human voices, shouting commands. She caught his eye. "That's your kind." He nodded. "Rescue team, or another set of hunters," she said flatly. They moved quickly, following the sound, until they reached a junction where the ceiling had partially collapsed. Through the debris, Daniel saw flashes of muzzle fire, human rifles, for sure, and the silhouettes of armored figures advancing. U.S. Marines, he breathed. The woman stayed still, unreadable. One of the Marines spotted him. Cross. Sergeant Cross. Get over here. Daniel took a step toward them, but felt her hand on his arm. They won't take me, she said quietly. And if you go with them, you'll never see me again. Her words hit harder than the firefight around them. Behind him, the Marine shouted again. Come on, Cross. Now, he looked at her. Golden eyes, skin like burnt amber, white hair catching the light from the gunfire. Chain still clinked faintly against her wrists. You have to choose, she said. The corridor felt too small for the weight of the decision. On one side, the Marines, his people, weapons raised, shouting for him to come. On the other, the alien woman, chained, armed, unflinching, watching him with that sharp, unwavering gaze. Cross. The voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. He recognized it instantly. Captain Reynolds. His old CO alive. Daniel's chest tightened. They could get him out. They could end this. All he had to do was step toward them. Her fingers tightened on his arm. Not hard, but enough to anchor him in place. If you go, she said, voice low under the gunfire, you'll never know what they're hiding in this place. And you'll never see me again. It should have been simple. Humans save their own. Mission over. Extraction. Debrief. But the war had taught him one thing. Nothing was ever as simple as it looked. He glanced at the Marines. Behind them, the corridor was clear, for now. Behind her, the path was smoke, shadow, and uncertainty. And yet, there was something in her eyes. Not a plea, not fear. A challenge. A blast rocked the floor, shaking dust from the ceiling. The Marines flinched, shouting to cover. Reynolds' voice roared over the noise. Move, soldier. Daniel's decision snapped into place like a rifle bolt. He turned, not toward his CO, but toward her. Lead the way. Her lips curved, just barely. You're going to regret that. They broke into a run, the gunfire behind them shifting as the Marines realized they weren't following orders. Shouts echoed. Cross is going rogue. But the sound was swallowed by the wail of the sirens. They ducked into a side corridor, weaving between debris and burning panels. The air was hotter here, thick with the tang of scorched metal. You realize, Daniel panted, I just threw away my ticket home. You realize, she countered without looking back, that I just gave you a better one. Another explosion boomed somewhere below. The floor lurched, and a section of the ceiling gave way ahead of them, blocking the corridor. Daniel skidded to a halt. Great. She scanned the wall, spotting a maintenance hatch half hidden by a twisted pipe. Without hesitation, she jammed the edge of her blade into the seam and wrenched it open. The space beyond was narrow, barely lit, filled with cables and steam. She slipped inside, chains scraping against the walls, and Daniel followed. They crawled through the cramped tunnel until it opened into a circular chamber filled with glowing tanks. Each tank held something floating in a viscous fluid, shapes half familiar, half wrong. Some looked almost human. Others didn't. Daniel's stomach turned. What is this? Storage, she said simply. Failed experiments. Successful ones don't end up here. He stepped closer to one tank, his breath fogging the glass. The figure inside had human limbs, but its skin shimmered faintly like hers. Its eyes, closed, had faint gold under the lids. Are these hybrids? She didn't answer directly. The Kfar don't waste potential. They merge it. He looked at her sharply. You're saying. Later, she cut in. We need to keep moving. They crossed the chamber, slipping through another hatch into an even lower section of the prison. The air here was cold, the walls damp. The lighting shifted to a pale blue that made shadows stretch unnaturally. This is the old level, she said. They don't use it much, which means it's the safest way out. Daniel kept his rifle ready, senses straining. The silence here felt heavier than the chaos above, like the walls were holding their breath. Halfway down the corridor, a low growl rolled through the dark. It wasn't like the creatures from before. This was slower, deeper, predatory. She froze, motioning for him to stay still. Her golden eyes scanned the dark ahead. We're not alone. The growl came again, closer. Then, from the shadow, a massive figure emerged. It had the height of a kvar but the build of something far stronger, its exoskeleton dark and ridged. Its arms ended in claws longer than Daniel's forearm. The woman whispered, "Prison Warden Prime." Daniel swallowed. "Prime. They don't come out unless something really matters." The creature's gaze locked on them. Without warning, it lunged. Daniel fired, shot sparking off the warden's armor. It barely slowed. The woman darted aside, slashing at its side with her curved blade, scoring a shallow line that bled faintly blue. The warden roared, swinging one clawed arm. The blow smashed into the wall where she had been a heartbeat earlier. Daniel kept firing, aiming for joints, eyes, anything soft. The warden swatted him aside, sending him crashing into the cold wall. Pain flared through his ribs. She moved in, fast as lightning, leaping onto the warden's back. Her blade plunged into the gap between its neck plates, drawing a strangled bellow. The warden bucked violently, slamming her into the wall. Daniel pushed to his feet, vision swimming, and grabbed a fallen stun rod from the floor. As the warden turned toward him, he drove the rod up into the exposed wound in its neck. The creature convulsed, electricity crackling over its body, then collapsed with a ground-shaking thud. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing. She pulled her blade free, wiping it on the warden's armor. "You fight well for a man who almost went home." Daniel gave a pained grin. "You fight well for someone in chains." She met his eyes. "Maybe I won't be in them much longer." They moved on, stepping over the warden's body. Ahead, the corridor angled upward, a faint draft carrying the scent of fresh air. They were close, but before they reached the incline, voices echoed from above. Not Kvar, not human marines. Something else. The language was sharp, rhythmic, almost like singing, but with a coldness that made the hair on Daniel's neck rise. She stopped, listening intently. "They've sent the collectors." Daniel frowned. "The what?" Her expression was grim. "They don't take prisoners. They take assets. And right now, we're both on their list." The footsteps drew closer. Daniel tightened his grip on the rifle. "Guess we're making a stand." Her eyes locked on his. "No, we're making an escape." She grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward a side passage he hadn't even noticed. The walls here narrowed, the ceiling dropping until they had to crouch. The voices followed, faster now. Somewhere ahead, faint daylight spilled through a grate. "Almost there," she whispered. The voices were at their heels. They reached the grate. Daniel threw his shoulder against it. Once, twice. On the third hit, it gave way, spilling them out into the blinding light of a storm-swept sky. Rain lashed against his face. Wind howled around the jagged rocks that ringed the prison's outer wall. The ground was slick, treacherous. "We go down," she shouted over the wind. Daniel stared at the cliff edge. "Down where?" She smiled, the kind of smile that meant trouble. "Anywhere but here." Lightning split the sky, and they leapt. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this. The wind ripped the breath from Daniel's lungs as they plunged into the void. For a split second, there was nothing but the roar of the storm and the blur of rain-streaked darkness. Then, the jagged cliff face flashed past, close enough for him to feel the spray from water rushing in the cracks. Her grip on his wrist tightened. "Brace!" she shouted, the wind tearing at her words. They hit the water like stone against glass. Cold swallowed him whole. It wasn't just cold. It was the kind that burned, that stole the air from your chest before you could even think to breathe. The current seized them immediately, dragging them under. Daniel fought his way to the surface, gasping, the storm above a chaos of rain and lightning. He caught sight of her just ahead, cutting through the waves with strong, deliberate strokes despite the chains still hanging from her wrists. "This way," she called, voice ragged but steady. They swam parallel to the cliff, letting the current pull them away from the prison's looming silhouette. Every muscle in Daniel's body screamed, but the thought of what waited behind those walls kept him moving. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, they reached a narrow inlet where the water calmed. Rocks rose around them, shielding them from the worst of the wind. She pulled herself onto a slick ledge and reached back for him. The moment they were both out of the water, Daniel collapsed onto his back, chest heaving. "Remind me never to do that again." Her white hair clung to her face, droplets sliding over the orange of her skin. She was breathing hard, but her eyes still scanned the stormy horizon, wary. "They'll search the waters," she said. "We need to move inland before they send drones." Daniel pushed himself up. "Inland to what?" "We're in the middle of nowhere." "Inland to nowhere," she said simply. "That's the point." They climbed through the rocks, the rain easing as they gained higher ground. The land beyond the cliffs was a stretch of scrub and twisted trees, the soil dark and wet under their boots. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. Daniel glanced at her chains as they walked. "Those things have to go." She looked down at them, as though noticing for the first time. "They've been with me a long time." He stopped. "That's not an answer." She studied him for a moment, then knelt beside a fallen tree. The trunk was split, exposing a sharp, splintered branch. She set the chain's link against it and began to work, using the branch's edge like a crude file. Daniel watched, ready to take over, but she didn't ask for help. Her movements were efficient, practiced. Within minutes, one cuff broke loose. The second took longer, but soon both lay in the mud. She flexed her wrists, rubbing the skin where the metal had been. The marks were deep, but not fresh. "Better." Daniel bent to pick up the discarded chains, instinct telling him not to leave evidence. "Souvenir." She shook her head. "Proof." They moved on, skirting the edge of shallow ravine. The storm's energy was fading, leaving the air heavy and damp. Daniel's mind kept circling back to the Marines, to Reynolds' voice in the chaos. He'd turned his back on them, on rescue, for her, for answers he didn't even have yet. "You going to tell me your name?" he asked finally. She glanced at him. "You didn't ask before." "I'm asking now." For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Syrah." "Syrah," he repeated, testing the sound. "Where are you from?" Her gaze shifted forward, farther than you can imagine. He almost pressed for more, but something in her tone told him the conversation was over. For now. They reached the tree-line, the shadows of the twisted forest closing around them. Here, the air smelled of wet earth and resin. The light was dim, filtered through the canopy, and the ground soft with layers of fallen needles. Syrah slowed, crouching to study the ground. "Tracks," she murmured. Daniel stepped closer. The prints were unlike anything he'd seen. Wide, with 3 forward-pointing toes and deep claw marks. "Fresh. What are they?" "Hunters," she said, voice flat. "Not Kfar. Not human. They work for whoever pays." "Collectors," he guessed. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Sometimes." Daniel adjusted his rifle. "How close?" "Close enough." They moved faster, weaving between trees, keeping to the uneven ground to mask their trail. The forest grew thicker, the light dimmer. At one point, Syrah stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. Daniel froze, following her gaze. Through the trees ahead, shapes moved, tall, slender, with segmented armor and long, curved weapons. Their heads turned unnaturally far, scanning the shadows. Even at a distance, Daniel could feel the precision in their movements. Professional. Patient. Syrah's voice was a whisper in his ear. "We can't fight them here. Too open." Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. "Then what?" She nodded toward the ravine they'd passed earlier. "We lead them to the drop." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. They retraced their steps quietly, the faint sound of pursuit always behind them. Once back at the ravine, Syrah moved to the edge, checking the depth. The bottom was a tangle of jagged rocks and deadfall. She looked at Daniel. "Stay low." They hid in the undergrowth, waiting. The hunters appeared minutes later, their strange weapons glinting in the fading light. Syrah's hand closed on Daniel's arm. The signal. They broke cover, drawing fire instantly. Bolts of crackling energy scorched the trees as they ran along the ravine's edge, just far enough ahead to lure the hunters into chasing. At a narrow bend, Syrah dropped suddenly, rolling to the side. Daniel mirrored her. The lead hunter didn't have time to stop. Its foot hit loose soil, and the ground gave way. 2 more followed, momentum carrying them over the edge. The sound of bodies hitting stone was swallowed by the wind. Daniel peered over. No movement below. Syrah was already moving again. That will slow them, not stop them. They pushed deeper into the forest, the shadows growing darker with each step. Somewhere ahead, The faint glimmer of light marked the edge of the trees. Daniel's chest ached from the run, but when they emerged from the forest, the sight made him forget the pain. In the distance, under the bruised colors of the evening sky, lay a settlement, small but clearly human. Smoke curled from chimneys. Lights glowed warmly in windows. The kind of place that didn't belong this close to a war zone. Daniel exhaled. Civilization. Sierra's expression didn't change. Don't trust appearances. They stood at the tree line, the first drops of night, rain, starting to fall. Behind them, the forest whispered with unseen movement. Daniel looked at her. You think they'll let us in? She met his gaze, eyes steady. We'll find out. But remember, once we walk in there, there's no going back. The settlement was smaller than it had looked from the ridge. Maybe 24 buildings huddled together behind a fence of rusted metal sheets and salvaged wood. The gate was nothing more than a reinforced gap between two watchtowers, each manned by a guard in mismatched armor. Their weapons were human-made, battered but functional. As Daniel and Sierra approached, one of the guards raised a hand. Stop right there. Daniel kept his hands visible, rifle slung behind his back. We're not looking for trouble. The guard's eyes flicked to Sierra, lingering on the orange skin, the white hair still damp from the storm. You sure about that? Sierra's expression didn't change, but Daniel felt the subtle shift in her posture, the tightening of her shoulders, the way her gaze measured distances and angles. We need food, water, maybe a place to rest, Daniel said. We can pay. The guard hesitated, then nodded to the other watchmen. The gate creaked open just enough for them to pass. Inside, the streets were muddy, the air thick with the scent of cooking fires and oil. People moved quickly, heads down, but more than a few eyes followed them. Most were human, but Daniel caught glimpses of other species. A scaled merchant haggling over fuel cells, a pair of avian traders unloading crates. They were led to a low building near the center of the settlement. Inside, it was warmer, the light from a single lantern casting deep shadows. A woman in a patched coat sat behind a desk, her hair streaked with gray. Name's Mara, she said. I run things here. You two have a story. Not one you believe, Daniel replied. Mara's eyes narrowed. Try me. Sierra stepped forward. We escaped from a Kfar facility on the cliffs. They'll come looking. Mara leaned back, studying her. And you're someone they'd rather see dead, Sierra said. The silence stretched. Then Mara sighed. We've got spare bunks in the South Barracks. You can stay one night. After that, you're someone else's problem. It wasn't much, but it was more than Daniel expected. The barracks were a long, narrow room lined with metal-framed beds. The sheets were clean enough, the air carrying the faint smell of disinfectant. Sierra took the bed nearest the far wall, her back to the door. Daniel sat on the bed opposite, pulling off his boots. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, he broke it. You didn't have to tell her the truth. Sierra looked at him. I didn't. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the truth. Not all of it. Her voice was calm, but there was something in her eyes, a shadow of old pain. He leaned forward. Then tell me. All of it. She hesitated. Then, the Kfar didn't take me as a soldier. They took me as a message. My people wouldn't surrender, so they made an example. Daniel's jaw tightened. An example. She nodded once. They paraded me through their stations, told their slaves what happens to those who resist. When that didn't break me, they locked me in a cell. Years passed. Then you showed up. Daniel didn't know what to say. The idea of her, proud, fierce, locked away and used as a warning lit a cold fire in his chest. You're free now, he said. Her gaze didn't waver. No one is free until the Kfar are gone. Later, after the lights in the barracks dimmed, Daniel lay awake, listening to the rain on the roof. Across the room, Sierra was a still silhouette, her breathing slow and steady. He should have been thinking about their next move, about how to get farther from the cliffs before the Kfar closed in. Instead, he kept replaying the way she'd stood in Mara's office, unflinching, unafraid, and the way her voice softened only when she'd spoken to him. At some point, exhaustion dragged him under. The next morning, the settlement was buzzing. Word of the escape had spread, and rumors were growing faster than the truth could catch them. Some said Sierra was a smuggler. Others whispered she was a rebel leader. Mara didn't seem inclined to correct anyone. Daniel and Sira ate quickly in the mess hall, a watery stew, but hot. Outside, the sky was clear for the first time since they'd hit the water. "We should leave today," Sira said. Daniel nodded. Agreed. But not without supplies. They split the task. He bartered with a mechanic for a half-charged power cell. She secured dried food from a trader who seemed almost afraid to look her in the eye. By midday, they had enough to make it a few days inland. As they prepared to leave, Mara found them at the gate. "The Kfar patrols have been sighted west of here," she said. "If you head that way, you're walking into them." Sira tilted her head. "And if we head east?" "East leads to the highlands," Mara said. "Fewer patrols, but rough terrain. You'll need to watch each other's backs." Daniel glanced at Sira. "We can handle it." Mara's gaze lingered on him. "For her sake, I hope so." The highlands rose quickly, the path winding through jagged stone and sparse vegetation. The air was cooler here, the horizon stretching wide and empty. They walked in silence for hours, the only sounds a crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant cry of some unseen bird. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they found a shallow cave sheltered from the wind. Daniel gathered dry brush for a small fire. Sira watched him work, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. "You're different from the others," she said suddenly. He glanced up. "Others?" "The soldiers I've met," she clarified. "Most see me as a trophy. Or a threat. You don't." Daniel shrugged. "I see you as someone who deserves a chance." Her gaze held his for a long moment, and in that quiet space between them, something shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. That night, they sat close to the fire, the wind howling outside. Sira told him pieces of her home world. The twin suns, the oceans that glowed at night, the songs her people sang before battle. Daniel shared fragments of his own past, the sister back home, the war that had taken everything else. Neither of them mentioned the Kfar, but their shadow hung over every word. When the fire burned low, Sira rested her head back against the cave wall, eyes half closed. "Tomorrow, the highlands will test us," she said softly. "But tonight we rest." Daniel nodded, settling against the opposite wall. And for the first time since the prison, he let himself believe they might actually have a future worth fighting for. The morning came cold and sharp. A thin mist clung to the highland slopes, turning the rocks slick underfoot. Daniel woke before the sun, scanning the horizon for movement. Sira was already awake, crouched near the cave entrance, her white hair catching the first traces of light. "They've been following us since yesterday," she said without turning. Daniel's gut tightened. How many? Too many to outrun. He should have expected this. The Kfar didn't give up easily, and Sira wasn't just any prisoner. She was a symbol of defiance, one they couldn't afford to let escape. They packed quickly, moving without words. The path ahead narrowed into a ridge barely wide enough for two people. Beyond it, sheer drops vanished in a cloud. Halfway across, the first shot rang out. The plasma bolt slammed into the rock near Daniel's shoulder, spraying shards into his face. He dove behind a boulder, rifle snapping to his hands. Sira flattened against the stone beside him, her eyes scanning the slopes below. "They're coming from both sides," she said. "They're trying to box us in." Daniel's mind raced. The ridge ahead curved around a jagged outcrop. If they could reach it, they might break the line of sight. But between here and there was open ground. "I'll draw their fire," he said. "You move first." Sira's gaze snapped to his. "That's suicide. Better me than both of us." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. When Daniel leaned out to fire, she was already moving, her lithe frame darting across the ridge. Plasma bolts hissed past her, some close enough to sear the air around her head. She didn't flinch. Daniel followed, firing in short bursts to keep the enemy pinned. They reached the outcrop together, lungs burning. Below, figures in Kfar armor were swarming up the slope. Insect-like forms, their segmented limbs glinting in the morning light. At least a dozen, maybe more. "We can't stay here," Sira said. "They'll climb." Daniel's eyes scanned the ridge, and then he saw it. A narrow crevice in the rock, just wide enough for a person to slip through. If they could make it inside, They might lose the Kvar in the maze of highland caves. "This way," he shouted. They ran, boots slipping on loose gravel. Another shot cracked past Daniel's ear, the heat making his skin prickle. He shoved Sira into the crevice first, then followed, the walls scraping his shoulders. Inside, the light dimmed. The tunnel twisted sharply, and the sound of pursuit echoed close behind. They moved fast, but the Kvar moved faster, their claws scraping on stone, their chittering growing louder. The tunnel ended abruptly in a chamber lit by a shaft of pale sunlight from above. The floor dropped away into a chasm, so deep Daniel couldn't see the bottom. "We're trapped," Sira said. "Not yet." Daniel scanned the chamber. There, a narrow ledge running along the wall. It might lead to another passage, but it was barely wide enough to walk. And halfway along, part of it had crumbled away, leaving a gap over the void. "I'll go first," he said. "If I make it, I'll help you across." Sira hesitated, then nodded. Daniel edged onto the ledge, the stone cold under his fingers. The drop yawned beside him, every step sending small rocks tumbling into the dark. He reached the gap, took a breath, and jumped. His boots slammed into the far side, his hands catching the rock just in time to keep from slipping. Heart pounding, he pulled himself up and turned back. "Your turn." Sira moved with the same calm precision she always carried in danger. She reached the gap, bent her knees, and a plasma bolt hit the wall above her. The explosion of light and heat made her slip. "No." Daniel lunged forward, catching her wrist just as she fell. The sudden weight nearly tore him from the ledge. His muscles screamed as he pulled her up, the stone biting into his palms. They collapsed against the far wall, both gasping. "That was too close," she said. Daniel managed a grim smile. "You're telling me." They moved quickly down the new passage, the sound of the Kvar fading behind them. But Daniel knew they weren't safe yet. Hours later, they emerged onto a plateau overlooking the highlands. The sky was streaked with crimson, the sun dipping low. Sira sat on a rock, her breathing steady but her face pale. Daniel noticed the scorch mark on her side, the bolt that had missed her heart by inches. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing," she replied, but the slight tremor in her hand said otherwise. He knelt beside her, pulling out the small medkit they'd taken from the settlement. As he worked, she studied him with a strange intensity. "You risked everything for me back there," she said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Guess I did." "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because you're worth it." Her eyes softened, just for a heartbeat, before the walls came back up. But something had changed. The line between survival and something more had blurred. They made camp at the edge of the plateau. The firelight danced on the orange of her skin, the white of her hair. Beyond them, the highlands stretched into darkness. They didn't speak of the Kvar. They didn't need to. The battle had left its mark, a scorch on her ribs, raw scrapes on his hands. But it had also left something else, the unspoken certainty that they would fight for each other again, no matter the odds. And for the first time, the night didn't feel quite so cold. The plateau felt like the edge of the world. Beyond it, the highlands rolled into shadow, and the horizon was nothing but a faint line where the dying light met the dark. For the first time in days, there was no sound of pursuit, no claws scraping stone, no static of Kvar calms on the wind. Daniel sat by the fire, turning the last ration pack in his hands. "Half for you, half for me," he said. Sira didn't argue. She just took the portion, eating slowly, her gaze fixed on the flames. The light danced in her silver eyes, softening the sharpness that danger had carved into her features. "You've been quiet," Daniel said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" She hesitated, then, "About what comes next. You can't keep running forever." "Neither can I." Daniel poked the fire with a stick. Sparks leapt upward into the cold air. "I'm not planning on running forever, but I don't exactly have a map of friendly territory." "You think the Kvar will stop?" she asked. "They won't. Not until they have you back." Her lips tightened. "Then you should leave me here." He looked up sharply. "Not a chance." "Daniel." "No," he said, his tone final. "We've been through too much. I'm not walking away now." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. There was something heavy in it, like unspoken truths pressing at the edges. Later, when the fire burned low, Daniel went through the small pack of supplies. The medkit was almost empty, and their canteen was half full. But there was one thing he hadn't touched. A folded scrap of old paper he kept hidden at the bottom. On it was a map, sketched from memory. Old military outposts, smuggler trails, hidden caches. Places the Kfar might not know. He spread it out on a flat rock. "Here," he said, pointing to a mark near the western edge of the highlands. "There's a settlement. Not big, but I've heard they're willing to hide people, if you can pay." "And what will you pay with?" Sira asked. He looked at her. "I'm hoping they'll see keeping you safe as payment enough." Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer. In the morning, the wind changed. It carried the smell of rain and something else, smoke. Daniel woke to find Sira standing near the cliff edge, scanning the valleys below. "They're burning the lower passes," she said, "to flush us out." Daniel joined her. Far below, columns of black smoke twisted into the sky. If the fire reached the highland slopes, they'd be forced to move fast. They packed in silence, each movement efficient, practiced. When they started down the narrow trail from the plateau, the air was already thickening with the scent of burning brush. Hours passed in tense quiet. The sky darkened, not just from clouds but from the smoke creeping upward. Daniel's throat felt raw. He kept glancing at Sira, noting the slight strain in her breathing. By mid-afternoon, they reached a stream cutting through a steep gorge. Daniel knelt, splashing water on his face and filling the canteen. Sira crouched beside him, dipping her hands into the flow. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I've been in cages, transport holds, prison cells, and none of them felt as dangerous as open air does now." Daniel handed her the canteen. "Out here, danger's just harder to see." That night, they made camp inside a shallow cave overlooking the gorge. The fire crackled faintly, its smoke blending with the haze outside. Daniel found himself watching her again. The way the firelight traced the curve of her cheek, the way her hair, white as frost, caught the flicker. She caught him looking. "What?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just wondering how you're still standing." She gave a small, humorless smile. "You learn to keep standing, or you don't survive." They ate in quiet. Somewhere outside, the distant crack of falling trees echoed up the gorge, the fire still moving. When Daniel lay back against the cave wall, exhaustion dragged at him. But before sleep could claim him, Sira spoke. "You asked me once why the Kfar want me so badly." He opened his eyes. She was staring at the fire, not at him. "It's not just because I escaped," she said. "It's because of what I am. My blood carries something rare. They've been trying to breed it into their soldiers for years." Daniel felt a slow, cold realization crawl through him. "That's why they won't stop." She nodded. "And why they'll burn the highlands to ash if it means getting me back." The next morning, the wind carried a faint metallic tang, the scent of Kfar weapons fire. Daniel's instincts sharpened instantly. They weren't far now. Sira tightened the strap of her pack. "If we keep west, we might reach the settlement in 2 days." "And if they're already there?" Daniel asked. "Then we keep moving." He wanted to tell her they'd make it, that the settlement would be safe, that the Kfar wouldn't get past whatever defenses it had. But he couldn't lie to her. They'd seen too much to pretend. Instead, he just said, "We'll find a way." That night, they didn't light a fire. The stars burned cold above, and the highlands lay in shadow. Sira sat close enough that her shoulder brushed his. "You could still leave," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at her, at the pale light of the moon tracing the lines of her face. "Not my style," he said finally. She turned away, but he caught the faintest hint of a smile. This was the quiet before the next storm, and they both knew it. The highland wind was colder that morning. It carried no smoke now, only the thin, crisp air of the mountains. Daniel woke before Sira, the pale dawn light spilling across the rock floor of their makeshift shelter. For a moment, he just watched her sleep, the first time in days her face wasn't drawn with tension. He stepped outside quietly. The gorge below shimmered with mist, the sun a faint glow behind it. The world looked peaceful, almost untouched. But Daniel knew better. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the Kfar were still moving, still hunting. He crouched by the stream, cupping water to his lips. The cold bite of it grounded him. This, the quiet, the beauty, was the kind of thing war stole from you, piece by piece, until you forgot it even existed. Sierra stirred inside the shelter. When she emerged, she wrapped her thin cloak tighter against the wind. "You're awake early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Memories. Instinct," he replied. "Every time things get too quiet, I start listening for footsteps." She joined him by the stream, kneeling to wash her face. The water ran down her orange skin in fine rivulets, catching the light. "I used to think silence meant safety," she said. "Now I know it just means the danger hasn't found you yet." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sounds about right." They walked most of the morning without speaking. The terrain leveled out into a wide stretch of grassland, the mountains receding into the distance behind them. It felt wrong, being so exposed, but it was the fastest way west. Around midday, they stopped beneath a lone, twisted tree. Daniel dug into his pack for the last ration. He split it, handing her the larger half without comment. She accepted it with a nod, then glanced at the horizon. "You think we'll make it to that settlement?" "Depends," Daniel said. "On them, on us on luck." "You don't believe in luck," she said, not as a question. "I believe in keeping moving," he said. "Luck's just a name people give to surviving long enough to find a break." As they ate, the sky shifted, clouds pulling in from the west, the air growing heavier. Daniel scanned the distance and caught sight of something faint, the suggestion of rooftops far beyond the rolling hills. "There," he said, pointing. Sierra's eyes followed his finger. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, "It's smaller than I thought." "That can be good," Daniel said. "Less to notice, fewer to betray us." "Or fewer to protect us," she countered. They resumed walking. The closer they got, the more Daniel's chest tightened. Not from fear exactly, but from the uncertainty. Every step brought them closer to what might be safety, or might be the end. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking the settlement. It was little more than a cluster of stone buildings, a few smoke trails rising from chimneys. No visible fortifications, no guard towers. That could mean no threats nearby, or that the threats didn't need to worry about them. Sierra crouched beside him, studying the place. If the Kfar come, they won't be able to stop them. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure the Kfar don't come." She glanced at him. "You're still thinking like a soldier." "That's all I know how to be." They waited until nightfall to approach. The settlement was quiet, the dirt streets empty. A few lamps glowed in windows. Daniel kept one hand near the sidearm he'd taken from the prison. Old, worn, but still functional. An old man stepped out from one of the larger buildings, leaning on a cane. He eyed them carefully, his gaze lingering on Sierra. "You're far from anywhere worth going," he said. "Looking for shelter," Daniel replied. The man's eyes narrowed. "Shelter's not free." "We can work," Daniel said. "We don't want trouble." The old man looked at Sierra again. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Then he nodded toward the door. "Come inside. Talk." The interior smelled with smoke and herbs. The man poured water into 2 clay cups, sliding them across the table. "You're running from someone," he said flatly. Daniel didn't answer right away. "We just need a place to stay. A few days. Days can turn to weeks. Weeks can turn to trouble." Sierra finally spoke. "If trouble comes, it's after me, not the town." The old man studied her. "And what makes you worth chasing?" Her eyes didn't flinch. "I'm not worth telling." A silence fell, but it wasn't hostile. The man leaned back in his chair. "There's an empty barn at the edge of town. It's yours for the night. After that, we'll see." Outside, the cold air hit again. They walked toward the edge of the settlement, the dim shapes of barns rising ahead. Daniel glanced at Sierra. "Why didn't you tell him?" he asked. "Because once people know why the Kfar want me, they stop seeing me as a person." Daniel slowed his steps. "I don't." She looked at him for a long moment, then away. "That's why I'm still here." That night, lying in the straw of the barn, Daniel stared at the rafters. The wind rattled the boards. For the first time, they were under a roof, and it felt strange. Safe, but not safe enough. Sierra's breathing was steady nearby. In the dark, he let the thought form fully. Maybe this could work. Maybe we could stay. But another thought followed, sharper, or maybe the Kfar are already on their way. The stars outside burned cold and bright. Somewhere beyond them, the war was still raging. But here, for now, there was only the sound of the wind, and the quiet of two survivors who'd made it one more day. Winter came early that year. The grasslands froze under a crust of ice, and the wind howled through the gaps in the barn's boards. Daniel and Sarah stayed, day after day, helping with whatever the townsfolk would allow, fixing fences, hauling wood, tending fires. Slowly, the wary glances softened. People began to greet them by name. For a time, Daniel almost forgot what it was to constantly watch the horizon. 3 months later, the barn had been repaired. They slept in a small room above it now. Daniel woke each morning to the muffled sounds of Sarah in the kitchen, her voice low as she learned the town's language from an old woman who took a liking to her. The cadence was different from English, but she picked it up quickly, weaving it into her speech until she could trade a joke at the market or thank someone without hesitation. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself at the blacksmith's forge more often than not. His hands remembered the weight of a weapon, but the work here was quieter, repairing tools, shaping hinges, bending iron into things that built rather than destroyed. One evening, after the forge was closed, Daniel walked the ridge above town. The snow crunched under his boots, and his breath misted in the air. Below, the lights of the settlement glowed warm against the dark. Sarah joined him a few minutes later, her white hair catching the last glint of sunset. She stood beside him, silent at first. "They haven't come," she said at last. "Not yet." "They will," Daniel said, not out of fear but certainty. "People like the Kfar don't forget." "And when they do?" she asked. Daniel looked at her. "We deal with it, like we've dealt with everything else." Sarah tilted her head toward the town. "Sometimes I think about leaving, going somewhere they'd never expect." "You'd be running forever," Daniel said. "At least here, we've got a place to stand." Her gaze met his. "You'd stand with me, even if it meant dying?" He didn't answer immediately. The wind pushed between them, biting cold. "I didn't survive all this to watch you fall alone." That winter passed without incident. When the thaw came, the river swelled, and life in the settlement quickened again. Children laughed in the streets. The market filled with color and noise. Daniel still kept a rifle hidden in the loft, just in case, but he stopped sleeping with one eye open. Some nights, Sarah would sit by the fire and tell him pieces of her life before the prison. She spoke of her homeworld, oceans the color of liquid gold, sky towers that shimmered like glass. But always, she would stop before the part that brought her in Kfar hands. Daniel didn't push. Everyone had ghosts. Spring blurred into summer. Daniel was repairing the barn's west wall one morning when the old man who'd first taken them and came walking up the path. His cane sank deep in the dirt as he leaned close. "Strangers on the southern road," the old man said. 3 of them, heavily armed. Daniel's stomach tightened. Kfar didn't see their faces, but they moved like hunters. Daniel nodded once. "I'll handle it." The old man's gaze flicked toward the house where Sarah was tending to laundry. "You'll want to be quick." That night, Daniel and Sarah sat at the kitchen table long after the lamps were out. The only light came from the moon through the window. She didn't ask him if it was the Kfar. She already knew. "So, it begins again," she said quietly. "Maybe," Daniel said, "or maybe it ends." She studied him for a long time, then reached across the table, her hand warm against his. "Then whatever happens, it happens together." The strangers arrived the next day. They weren't Kfar. Not exactly. Mercenaries, maybe. Their leader wore a patchwork of armor, his face a map of old scars. Daniel met them at the edge of the settlement, rifle slung over his shoulder. "We're not here for you," the leader said. His eyes slid past Daniel, toward the town. "We're here for her." "Then you are here for me," Daniel said, leveling the rifle. A silence stretched. The mercenary's mouth twitched, halfway to a smile. "You think you can stop us?" "I don't need to stop you," Daniel said. "I just need to make it cost more than you're willing to pay." They stared each other down until the mercenary spat in the dirt. "Not today," he said, turning back to the road. "But we'll be back." Daniel watched them disappear into the horizon. He didn't lower the rifle until the dust had settled. That night, as they sat by the fire, Sarah said, "They'll keep coming. Then we keep fighting," Daniel replied. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," he said. "Not easy, but simple." Years later, people in the settlement would still talk about the quiet soldier and the alien woman with hair like snow. They'd tell stories, some true, most not, about how they came to the town, how they faced the hunters who sought them, and how they always came back from the edge. And somewhere beyond the stars, the Kfar would still remember their names. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this.